Ministers are poised to reject the idea of rushing through rule changes, saying, quotes from an anonymous source, "We will beat reform by defeating their arguments rather than changing the rules to stop them from getting money from Elon Musk. You don't successfully take on populists by changing the rules in a bid to thwart them." Be getting Natasha Clark's view on that, our political editor, in a second. I would just say this. This is pretty classic Labour and progressive naivety, I would say, in dealing with populism. If you were going to be unkind, you might call it bedwetting, which is a little something that the Labour Party is a little bit too prone to with matters like this. Do we think for one moment, if say Bill Gates, under a Conservative government or whoever it happened to be, was threatening or suggesting they might pour in tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars to help the Labour Party or progressive candidate, do we think that the Conservative Party, or whoever it happened to be, wouldn't, in a moment, out of sheer political calculation and lack of political mercy, decide to change the rules? Of course they would. And they'd be right to do so, because foreign money flowing into the UK in that way, no one wants that. No one should want that, from whichever end of the political spectrum they are. And what I would say is this. Two things. Take on the arguments. Take on the populists with progressive arguments. Well, then you've got to bring those arguments forward. Where are they? Where are they being put in the most strident terms possible? Because right now we're not seeing it. And secondly as well, yes, maybe Nigel Farage would complain. He always complains about something, about saying the rules are being changed. Guess what? Nigel Farage has been doing that for years. It is textbook populism. He will do it, and he will do it well, and no one can do it better. But you know what? Absorbing that political pain for however long it lasts, which wouldn't be very long, by the way, will be 1,000,000 times better than the political pain of having to see the internet, where our political advertising is very poorly regulated, in fact, not regulated at all by comparison to what you would hear on stations like this or on the television, which are, of course, Ofcom regulated. That would be far better than seeing the internet flooded with Musk's millions. Because no matter what you do then, you might think you're delivering as the Labour government. You might well be. But you know what? People won't feel it. Because in this age where we're in, where content is king, where vibes are everything, you know what happens? People absorb the narrative that they will be absorbing from what Musk is providing them, or Musk's money is providing them anyway. So I think we've got another example here of where, to be honest, Labour and the government are living in another political age and not seeing what is coming down the track for them. Let's talk to Natasha Clark now, political editor, of course. There'll be Labour MPs worried about this, won't they, Natasha?
Yeah, hugely worried about the impact of a $100 million donation.
If it happens.
If it happens, and what exactly it might mean. But those pictures that we saw earlier this week of Elon Musk standing next to Nigel Farage and Nick Candy, who is the new Treasurer of Reform, will send chills down some people in Number 10's spines because of exactly that dilemma that you just outlined. How do they deal with the problem like Farage? It is not an easy solution. If they do change the rules, Nigel Farage is never going to let them forget it. And it gives him another political argument to play into. These guys, they just keep changing the goalposts. The establishment is stitched up against people like me. And he will have such a strong argument to say that these guys, they don't understand you and me. I'm the person that gets it. They are trying to subvert me. And that will only play into the hands of those populist arguments, I think, even more. So for the government, and this source quote that's in The Observer today, saying they don't want to rush through any of those rule changes, you might say it is naive. They will say that they are just trying to stop that argument from Nigel Farage coming back to bite them later on.
But he will say that anyway. He always says that. He always says that the rules are out to get him. He will always say the establishment is out to get him. That is quite literally his shtick.
Yeah, absolutely. But I understand their thinking there, that we will beat reform by defeating their arguments rather than changing the rules. However, you are completely right. They do not have a coherent argument to try and take on reform. And you see that in the sort of plan for change, the milestones that we had a couple of weeks ago from Keir Starmer. And every single government press release since then has been plan for change, plan for change. This is us delivering. And you've got that today from the government, who don't really have an announcement today other than to talk about the fact that they've started doing a lot of things in government since they've got into power. But look, 5.5 months in, what have we got? And the government say, look, we've introduced 30 bills since the summer. We are delivering on that change, starting to take the railways into public ownership, the Great British Energy Bill, buses, renters' rights, employees' employment rights. And they are saying, and the argument that Keir Starmer was making in his final Prime Minister's questions, which I thought was a very good one, is we are just getting started. There is more to come. Because if the government think that the last 6 months have flown by, the next 6 months are going to fly even quicker and even faster. We've got council elections, and we know that Reform of setting their sights on some of those with big wins. I think we will see from them. They're taking seats off the Conservatives that they last won under Boris Johnson's vaccine bounce. It's that they are going to go, those seats. And then obviously once we get to a year in power, once we get to July, Labour's first year, there is going to be a lot of looking back to say, OK, where is this change that you delivered? What is different about life in Britain a year ago? And Keir Starmer talks about turning the oil tanker around, and it's going to take some time to do so. The British public are impatient for that change. And if they do not start to see it in the next 6 months, he is going to be in real trouble.
Meanwhile, while we're on Musk and American matters, obviously one of the big announcements from this past week has been the much-awaited, long-awaited announcement on who our next ambassador to the United States is going to be, which we now know will be Peter Mandelson, with the government having havered about it for some time. Not perhaps the most welcome news then, that one of Trump's most senior campaign aides, Chris LaCivita, one of the most senior people on the most recent Trump campaign, called the ambassador designate, Peter Mandelson, called on the British government to replace him almost no sooner had he been announced, saying that he should stay home, sad, very Trumpian comment there, sad. Mandelson, and he described Trump, his saying Mandelson described Trump as a danger to the world and a little short of a white nationalist, and Savita calling him a moron. Yeah. Not ideal, that, is it?
Not great. And look, he's going to be a really difficult appointment, I think. He'll be really, experienced and interested and interesting.
He's a big hitter.
He is a big hitter, but I think his closeness to the EU will worry some in the Trump administration. They are going to not see him as Britain's man in Washington, but they might see him as the EU's man in Washington. And that's the worry for someone from an organisation that Donald Trump has traditionally been incredibly sceptical of. So that will be a problem. And Peter Mandelson, I think I was speaking to some Labour MPs earlier this week. They were really keen to see someone a bit more businessman-like put in that role. They thought that Donald Trump would respect somebody who knows how to sort of strike a proper deal, and they're not sure that Lord Mandelson is going to be that person. However, people in government say a lot of experience, trade negotiator, understands the way political things work. But is he of a different age, like you were just saying earlier about this Labour government? Doesn't he speak to a bit of a bygone era of New Labour, which we're just not living in anymore?
And meanwhile, of course, we're getting two for the price of one, because not only we will have an official ambassador from the United States, but we're also, alongside lucky countries like Syria and Yemen, going to get a US special envoy who just so happens to be the former television producer of The Apprentice, someone with whom obviously Trump has had a long association, Mr. Mark Burnett. So we're going to get a special envoy as well. How's that going to work?
Very exciting. Yes, Mark Burnett, the producer of The Apprentice TV show, is going to be our special envoy to the UK, in quotes, to enhance diplomatic relations. Well, it does raise the question, well, what on earth is Lord Mandelson going to be doing if not that? And why there are these two separate systems for having an ambassador and having a special envoy. And like you say, on that list, North Korea, Syria, Sudan, Yemen, Belarus and Iran all have special envoys. And the UK. So it is rather an interesting decision for Donald Trump's incoming presidency. 2025 going to be completely dominated, as we know, by what Donald Trump does, how it impacts the UK, how it impacts the rest of the world.
I mean, he already feels like he is president already, isn't it?
It does,
I mean, it's been much remarked upon in the US press, but Biden disappearing, vanishing.
He's quiet quitting.
Yeah, quiet quitting, as it's being said. Yeah, vanishing almost completely. And Trump already dominating UK-US relations and everything else.
Yeah, of course. Well, actually, you know what? Biden's decision to pardon his son and other things that he's pushed through.
Yes, that's true. That was the last big thing he did.
Sure, Storm Shadow missiles, signing off on those decisions despite fears in the administration, the US administration and the UK administration, that might escalate some tensions with the war in Ukraine. Two big decisions that Biden has taken in his last couple of months in office. But yes, look, but there's only so much Biden could do. He is now a lame duck Prime Minister. Now we are moving on to Donald Trump Mark II.